Hello there, kia ora. Last night, the working group hosted what they touted as iwi versus Peewee, a debate about the Treaty Principles Bill. In it, ACT leader and the subject of 25% of all mainstream media mentions in this country around politicians, David Seymour, debated his bill with Ngātai Toa's Helmut Modlik. The spin-off called it David versus a Goliath of Maoridom as they live blogged from the studio. What the event really ended up being, though, was a debate around the argument over whether or not Maori ceded sovereignty, which they didn't. But David Seymour would never accept that. He kept arguing that he wants equal rights for everyone, no matter their race, under the rule of a sovereign head of state who has separate rights, like the right to never be arrested or sued. Which, sounds logical, but it's actually a reframing of te tiriti. After all, it wasn't an agreement between races, it's a treaty about governance that promised equitable outcomes between peoples of two nations. One of those nations was represented by the monarch, the other was represented by rangatira from all over the motu. Now, for most of the audience, this debate will not change their perspective. Those opposed to Seymour and his plan will say Helmut won with his use of context around history, research, and experience. Those who support Seymour will say that they felt he won hands down. What Seymour did do was use a litany of disinformation to argue his point, from his claim that Maori ceded sovereignty through to his right-wing stables of criticising academics and experts, and even pulled a J.D. Vance at one stage claiming he was focusing on the future, not the past. He even claimed that the 1981 Springbok riots were a whole nation united against apartheid, a very rose-tinted look at an event that, well, is definitely not like that. In fact, rugby fans hunted protesters after the Hamilton riot, vandalised their homes, and attacked some protesters at night on the streets. One of those protesters was actually Timi Maipi, the grandfather of our youngest MP, Hana Rafati Maipi Clark. Misrepresenting history to create an idealised version of the past, to build his idealised version of the future, is a shaky place for Seymour to make an argument from, but it's how he's approached this topic for quite some time. He and his proxies have used a lot of nostalgia-fueled perspectives to justify their arguments. And in the chat, that was evident. One user, calling themselves Pacific Ocean, repeated dozens of times the single line, Sir Apirana Ngata. Ngata is held by the most extreme racist supporters of ACT's actions as a good Maori, because while he had great mana, early in his career he was a believer that Maori ceded sovereignty. He wasn't an expert on the document and not an academic or constitutional expert on the topic, and rose to prominence at a time when assimilation into the dominant European culture was seen by many as the only way to survive for Maori. That's why the rich people behind the NZCPR were so keen to seek donations to get it printed and put on the front of major newspapers for free. The pro-Seymour audience was adamant he won, and while many would argue that feelings don't matter, they clearly don't seem to think facts matter either. But there's a sign or two that in the long run, Seymour is likely to be the biggest loser due to his own determination to drag this out as long as he can. Last week, the NZ Herald published their Vibes of the Boardroom that looks at the feelings of CEOs of a bunch of companies. Like the business confidence survey that they do, it showed corporate donors of the coalition who dumped $15 million on them last year to help them get elected, despite all evidence it would result in, well, just look around, are suddenly really optimistic about a tanking economy and surging unemployment and increasing poverty rates. But they're also really annoyed with David Seymour and his culture war talking points. They find it a distraction from the important job of making them richer and, the economy and stuff. And many are turning off from the ACT Party for its inability to focus on real issues, not the ones ACT read about on their angry boomer Facebook posts. But with this bill likely to be in the news for the next 7 months, possibly longer, those donors to his party are far less likely to fund his campaign next election or lend him their private planes. The racist ones might, the ones who felt the debate warranted the use of the N-word to support Seymour's perspective in the chat. But if he keeps relying on misremembered history, incorrect data, and pushing for things that his most prominent local donors are sick of hearing, well, that's going to be a headache for him come election fundraising time, and maybe beyond. Wait, you're still here? It's over. Find another video.